Welcome, listeners, to the Whispering Library. We often hear tales of lives redeemed, of individuals finding their way back from the brink. They are stories that offer hope, that affirm belief in second chances. But what if the foundation of that hope was built on a carefully constructed lie? What if the inspiring narrative was less about overcoming darkness and more about desperately hiding from it? Tonight, we follow the thread of a quiet doubt, a persistent whisper that suggested a celebrated success story masked a chilling, unfinished truth. Prepare yourself. The weight of hidden secrets can be crushing. Part 1. Introduction. The applause was warm, genuine. Sarah Grace O'Connell, formerly Sarah Jenkins in the colder, clinical language of court documents, stepped back from the podium at the Willow Creek Outreach Center. Her smile, radiant and confident, seemed to banish the persistent drizzle outside. She had just delivered her standard address, the one that had been quoted in local papers and earned her invitations to fundraising galas. The story of a young mother caught in a spiral of bad choices and chaotic friends, facing down a prison sentence for drug facilitation, and finding redemption through hard work and the support of the center. When I was standing in that courtroom, she'd recounted, her voice carrying just the right tremor of past fear. The only thing I could think of was my daughter. The possibility of losing her. It was a physical pain. That's what snapped me awake. It wasn't easy, the probation, the therapy, going back to school online to get my criminology degree. There were days I wanted to give up. But the center, the people here, they believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. She spoke of her new role, helping other women navigate the complex system she had successfully traversed. She was a living, breathing embodiment of hope within the community. The local news segment, which had aired just last month, had focused on her radiant transformation, highlighting her articulate explanations of how peer support and vocational training were key to reducing recidivism. The reporter had touched briefly on the details of her conviction, phone messages linking her to cocaine supply, but had accepted her explanation of naive mistakes with unquestioning sympathy. It was a clean, uplifting narrative. Yet, tucked away in dusty file cabinets in the city's courthouse, the actual details of her case painted a slightly less straightforward picture. The indictment mentioned coded communications, specific instructions for delivery, and references to locations and quantities that suggested more than just blindly forwarding texts. The officer who had originally taken the case had noted in his internal report a peculiar calm about the defendant during questioning, and a sense that her carefully worded explanation felt rehearsed. The buy money, several $100s intended for the transaction she was linked to, had never been recovered. Small details, easily overlooked in the face of a sympathetic defendant and a cooperative plea. But to eyes trained to spot dissonance, like those of retired Agent Mark Miller, there were tiny, unsettling cracks in the otherwise smooth surface of Sarah's story. Had seen the news segment. He remembered the case, and the cracks he'd noticed back then seemed wider now. Part 2. The Seeds of Doubt. Mark Miller sat in the comfortable, if slightly worn, leather armchair in his study. Boxes of old case files were stacked precariously in one corner, monuments to a career spent chasing ghosts and running down whispers. Had meant to sort through them, perhaps donate some to the Police Academy archives, but retirement had a way of making time both abundant and elusive. The news segment about Sarah O'Connell, Sarah Jenkins from the case file, had triggered something, a persistent itch he hadn't felt in years. He located the file eventually, tucked between records of a major cartel takedown and a frustrating, unsolved human trafficking ring. USV Jenkins Sarah. He pulled out the disk containing the extracted phone data. He poured himself a glass of rye, the amber liquid catching the faint light from his desk lamp. Scrolling through the messages again, the old unease returned, sharper this time. Alpha says package is inbound. Meet at the Whispering Oaks, dusk. Use the code Night Owl. Confirm drop is clean. 2 units requested. Units usually meant grams or ounces in this kind of low-level transaction, depending on context. Money received. Left in the dead drop by the broken fence, usual place. Miller muttered to himself, naive, passing on friends' requests. This isn't, hey, can you ask your guy if he's got anything? This is coordinating. He zoomed in on the timestamps, cross-referencing them with the police timeline of her arrest. She'd been apprehended near a park known locally for a stand of old oak trees, not long after dusk. There was a section of broken fence behind an abandoned shed nearby, a place he knew had been used for dead drops in the past. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. The court had accepted her story. Her defense attorney had argued effectively that she was just a conduit, manipulated by savvier individuals, not a willing participant. Her lack of prior record, the tearful testimony about her daughter's health problems, the visible fear she displayed in court, it had all combined to paint a picture of someone foolish and exploited, not criminal. And the prosecution, eager for a quick conviction and perhaps believing her story themselves, hadn't pressed too hard on the inconsistencies in the phone data. Agent Miller, his former partner, Detective Susan Riley, sounded surprised on the phone. Mark? Haven't heard from you in months. Everything okay? Yeah, Sue, I'm all right, Miller said. Just looking into something old. Remember that Sarah Jenkins case? Little drug facilitator a few years back? Got a suspended sentence? A pause. Vaguely. Yeah, the one they made the poster child for the rehab center. What about her? The phone data, Sue, Miller said. Did you ever look at it closely? Those weren't just innocent messages. It was operational language. Coded. Specific. Come on, Mark, Sue sighed. That was years ago. Case is closed. She did her probation, turned her life around. Good story, right? Maybe too good, Miller said, his voice low. Something doesn't add up. The source who tipped you off. Remember who that was? Yeah. Lowlife named Gary Dobson. Wanted a break on his own collar. Said he saw the girl with the phone, setting up drops. Basic street intel. Did Gary ever mention who she was working for? Did he mention a name? A handle? Another pause. Not that I recall. Just the girl. Said she was careful. Never met the buyers herself. Always used drops. Careful, Miller repeated. Naive people aren't careful, Sue. Scared people are. Or people who know exactly what they're doing for someone else. He thought of the whispers about Ghost, the dealer who operated purely through layers of intermediaries. Was Sarah just another layer? Or something more central? The seeds of doubt, planted years ago, were beginning to sprout into a tangled, thorny mess in Mark Miller's mind. He knew he had to pull on this thread, no matter how much resistance he met. Part 3. The Deepening Mystery. Miller's initial inquiries were met with a wall of polite dismissal. The current head of narcotics saw no reason to revisit a closed case with a successful outcome. The probation department lauded Sarah's progress and saw any questions about her past as potentially damaging to her rehabilitation efforts. She's helping people. Agent Miller, one supervisor told him stiffly over the phone. Why dredge all that up? Because the truth matters, Miller replied, frustration creeping into his voice. And I think the truth about how she got involved is a lot darker than she's letting on, or maybe even knows. He decided to bypass official channels as much as possible. He revisited the neighborhood where Sarah had been arrested, walking the park, looking at the stand of old oaks, the broken fence near the abandoned shed. It looked exactly as he remembered from the case photos. A perfect spot for clandestine activity. He spent hours poring over news archives from that period, looking for anything unusual in the weeks leading up to her arrest. Other drug busts in the area, reports of unusual activity, anything that might be connected to Ghost or the network he suspected was operating. He found nothing concrete. Ghost was indeed a ghost, leaving no digital footprint, no easily traceable connections. His attention turned back to the friend Sarah had mentioned. Brenda, the woman Miller's search had located in a downtown shelter, remained his most promising lead, despite her initial reluctance. He visited the shelter again, waiting for Brenda to appear. When he saw her, huddled in a corner, he approached slowly. "Brenda," he said softly, "it's Mark Miller. We spoke the other day about Sarah?" Brenda flinched, pulling her worn coat tighter. "Look, I told you I don't know nothing. Break time equals 0. 7S/Brenda. I'm not the police," Miller said, sitting down a few feet away. "I'm retired. I'm trying to understand something about that time. It might even help Sarah, you know? If she was forced into things, maybe someone needs to know that." Brenda snorted, a harsh sound. "Forced? We were all forced, mister. One way or another." "Forced by who?" Miller asked, keeping his voice steady. "Was a ghost." Brenda's eyes widened in fear. She glanced around wildly. "You shouldn't say that name, mister. Seriously, some names, they got ears everywhere." "Is he still around?" Miller pressed, leaning forward slightly. Brenda hugged herself, shivering despite the warm air inside. "Don't know. Don't want to know. All I know is when you're in, and getting out. Sometimes that's the most dangerous part." "What did he do to Sarah?" Miller asked, his voice low. "Gary Dobson, the informant. He said Ghost had something on her." "Something he showed her?" Brenda hesitated for a long moment, chewing on her lip. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't there, but I heard things from another girl he used. Ghost, he was good at finding your weak spot. Your biggest fear. For Sarah, it was her kid. Always talking about how much she loved that little girl. He saw that. Used it." "Used it how?" Brenda shook her head, looking away. "That's all I know. Please, just leave me alone. I don't want no trouble." She stood abruptly and hurried away, disappearing into the maze of cots. Miller watched her go, the knot in his stomach tightening. Brenda's fear was genuine, and it pointed directly back to Ghost. Miller shifted his focus to finding Gary Dobson, the original informant. This proved to be even more challenging. Gary had a history of disappearing when he was clean, only to resurface when he needed drug money or was in trouble. Miller spent weeks canvassing low-rent motels, soup kitchens, and known hangouts for addicts and small-time dealers. He showed Gary's photo around, asking discreet questions, careful not to reveal his own identity or purpose too openly. The street network was tight-lipped, suspicion rampant. He learned Gary had done a short stint in state prison after his deal in the Jenkins case. A former corrections officer, whom Miller knew slightly from his DEA days, remembered Gary. "Small guy, jumpy," the officer recalled. kept looking over his shoulder, even inside. Asked for protective custody a couple times. Said he was afraid of someone he ratted on. Did he say who? Miller asked. Nah, just someone from the outside. Sounded terrified, though. Miller continued his relentless search. He felt like he was moving through molasses, each step difficult, each piece of information grudgingly given or painstakingly uncovered. But the pieces were starting to form a disturbing pattern. A meticulous dealer named Ghost, a network of terrified intermediaries, leverage involving deepest fears, and Sarah Jenkins, who had somehow emerged from it all with a suspended sentence and an inspiring, but potentially misleading, story of redemption. The deeper he went, the clearer it became that Sarah's past wasn't just a matter of poor choices. It was a matter of survival against a predator who still lurked in the shadows. Part 4. The Turning Point. It was a cold, wet Tuesday morning when Miller finally found Gary Dobson. He was huddled in a bus shelter on the edge of town, shivering, eyes vacant. He barely resembled the man in the police photo. Miller approached slowly, showing his hands. Gary? Gary Dobson? The man flinched, pulling back. Who's a skin? My name's Mark Miller, Miller said, his voice low and non-threatening. I talked to Detective Riley a while back. About the old days? Gary squinted at him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Riley, what do you want? I ain't done nothing. I know, Gary, Miller said. I need to understand some things about that time. About Sarah Jenkins. About Ghost. Gary's eyes went wide with panic. He started to push himself up. No, I told you, I don't know nothing about Ghost. Leave me alone. Hey, easy, Miller said, putting a calming hand on his shoulder. Gary was trembling violently. Look, Gary, I know you were scared back then. You're probably still scared. But I think Sarah was scared too. Really scared. More than anyone knew. I think Ghost had something on her, didn't he? Something bad? Gary hesitated, his gaze fixed on Miller's face, searching for something, truth, maybe, or just a lack of malice. He seemed to deflate, the meager energy draining out of him. He sank back onto the bench. Yeah, he whispered, his voice raspy. Yeah, he did. He had something real bad. What was it, Gary? Miller pressed gently. Brenda said she heard he showed Sarah something. Something on his phone? Gary nodded slowly, his eyes distant. Yeah, he told me about it. Bragged about it. Said he always found their pressure point. Sarah's was her kid. He broke into her place when she was out. Put cameras in there. Little ones. Got footage of her kid. Just playing. Being a kid. Gary shivered. Then he showed Sarah. Said if she didn't do exactly what he told her, every message, every drop, every single time, something bad would happen to the girl. An accident. He made it sound real convincing. Miller felt a cold wave wash over him. Not naive mistakes. Not just poor choices. This was pure, unadulterated evil. Using a child as leverage. It was monstrous. He installed cameras? Miller asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Where? Do you know? Nah, Gary mumbled. He didn't say. Just said he was always watching. Always knew if she messed up. Made her terrified. Saw her after he first showed her. She was white as a sheet. Like she'd seen a ghost. No pun intended, he added with a humorless chuckle. This was the missing piece. This explained the coded language, the meticulous adherence to instructions, the peculiar calm that was actually shock and fear. It explained why Sarah had stuck to the implausible, naive story. Any hint of blackmail, of Ghost's true methods, would put her daughter back in immediate danger. Her silence was protection. Her rehabilitation story was her desperate attempt to build a fortress around her life, hoping Ghost wouldn't be able to breach it. Miller's mind raced. Could there be records of the reported break-in? Could forensics have missed something? Could the camera footage still exist somewhere? Ghost was meticulous, but even meticulous criminals made mistakes. This wasn't just about clearing Sarah's name anymore. This was about exposing a predator who had built his empire on the fear of vulnerable people, a predator who might still be out there. The successful rehabilitation story was a lie, not because Sarah was still involved in crime, but because the threat that forced her into it had never truly gone away. The chilling truth was that Sarah Jenkins wasn't a criminal who found redemption. She was a victim who had been systematically terrorized into participation and who was still living under the shadow of that terror. Part 5. The Aftermath and Lingering Shadows. Meeting Sarah again, this time armed with the truth from Gary, was different. Miller didn't need to convince her. He simply laid out what he knew, his voice quiet, respectful. As he described what Gary had said about the cameras, about the leverage, Sarah finally broke down. The story spilled out of her, a torrent of suppressed fear and trauma. The break-in wasn't just about accessing her apartment. It was about installing the tiny, hidden cameras. Ghost had appeared at her door a few days later, charming at first, then menacing. Had shown her a video loop on his phone, her daughter, laughing, playing in their living room. Then his voice had dropped cold and hard. "Nice kid you got there, Sarah. Shame if anything happened to her." He'd given her instructions, a burner phone, and a stark warning: obey or watch her daughter pay the price. Every coded message, every nerve-wracking drop, had been performed under duress, fueled by a primal fear for her child's safety. "I couldn't tell anyone," Sarah wept, burying her face in her hands. "Not the police, not my lawyer. If I told them about him, about the cameras, he would have known. He said he was always watching. I had to survive. I had to get through it, get the suspended sentence, and build a life so clean, so public that maybe he couldn't touch me anymore." She had lived in constant terror during her probation, convinced every unknown car, every sudden noise was Ghost returning. Her work at the center wasn't just about helping others. It was about staying busy, staying visible, staying connected to a support system that felt like a flimsy shield against an invisible threat. Miller took Sarah's statement, detailing the coercion, the blackmail, the specific threats. He contacted the authorities again, presenting the new information, citing Gary's account and Sarah's corroborated testimony. The response was frustratingly familiar. Agent Miller, a prosecutor, told him curtly over the phone, "We appreciate the new information, but Mr. Dobson is an unreliable witness with a history of substance abuse. MS." O'Connell's testimony, while compelling emotionally, is from a defendant in a closed case who has a clear motive to claim coercion now that she's built a new life. There's no physical evidence of the cameras from the original break-in report, and Ghost is, as you know, just a handle. We have no actionable lead on his current identity or location. There's simply not enough here to reopen the case or launch a full-scale investigation that's likely to lead anywhere. "So, he gets away with it?" Miller asked, his voice tight with anger. "He terrorized this woman, used her child as leverage, and he just walks?" "The original conviction stands based on the evidence presented at the time," the prosecutor said, his tone final. "Ms. O'Connell served her sentence, complied with probation. By all accounts, she's rehabilitated. That's the official outcome." Miller hung up, the silence in his study heavy with injustice. The system, designed to deliver justice, sometimes chose convenience or lacked the tools or will to pursue the uglier, harder truths. Sarah's conviction, while legally sound based on the narrow scope of the original investigation, felt like a cruel irony now. She hadn't been a criminal in the way they understood. She had been a hostage. Sarah continued her work, a celebrated figure in the community, but the shadows never fully lifted. Miller would see her sometimes at local events, her public smile unwavering. But in the quiet moments, the vulnerability would surface, a quick, nervous glance over her shoulder, a tightening around her eyes when discussing difficult pasts with the women she helped. The fear was a silent companion, a constant reminder of the predator who had used her most profound love against her. Ghost was still out there. Miller knew it in his gut. He had left his mark on Sarah and countless others, a network of quiet victims too terrified to speak. Sarah had built a beautiful, fragile facade of redemption, but it was haunted by the unseen cameras, the chilling threats, and the knowledge that the man who had broken her wasn't locked away. The whispers of her past weren't just memories. They were the soft footsteps of a lingering dread, a chilling testament to the fact that sometimes the monsters aren't under the bed, but operating just beyond the frame, forever watching. "Do you know where you are?" "I'm in my bedroom," she said, her voice gaining strength, confidence returning as she focused on him, on their shared reality, the reality of their home, their life together. "I wore this dress for you, Ethan. The black one, the lace one. Do you like it?" She looked down at the rough cotton hospital gown she was wearing, then back at him, confused. But she had been wearing the dress. She had seen herself in the mirror. Dr. Peterson, Ethan, sighed softly, a sound of deep weariness. "April," he said, his voice gentle but firm, as if speaking to a child. "You're in a hospital room. This is Meadowbrook, and that's a hospital robe you're wearing, not a dress." "No." The word was a sharp, desperate cry, a denial that tore from her lungs. "No, that's not true. I was just in my room. I saw myself in the mirror, just a little while ago. I saw the dress." Her voice cracked, the carefully constructed, fragile hold on her reality beginning to splinter, thin lines appearing across the surface like a cracked windshield. "You're lying to me. All of you. You're trying to confuse me, to make me doubt myself. Are you trying to prove I'm insane? Is that what this is? A setup?" She pulled her hand away from his grasp and sat up abruptly, pointing a shaking finger at the two men in suits, at Mrs. Gable turned nurse, at Ethan turned Dr. Peterson. "They're in on it. You're all in on it. You're trying to drive me mad. Is this about Dr. Finch? Was she here? Did you plan this? To lock me away in here?" The tall man with the sharp eyes cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes, I assure you, no one is lying to you. We're here to help you. You have been a resident at this facility for 2 years. Your husband, Mr. Ethan Hayes, passed away in a car accident on September 9th, 2 years ago. Dr. Peterson here was the attending physician on your case initially, and has remained closely involved due to the unique presentation of your condition." Dr. Peterson looked at the wall behind her bed. It was bare, a featureless expanse of institution green paint. "April," he said again, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine sadness, but could also be expertly faked pity. "There's no mirror there. That's just an empty wall. There hasn't been a mirror in this room for 2 years." She whipped her head around, her eyes scanning the wall frantically. It was empty, blank. No mirror. No not fram. No smurfe. Just bare, painted plaster. A cold dread, deeper and more pervasive than any fear she had ever known, seeped in her bones, chilling her from the inside out. She started to mumble to herself, a desperate, shaky litany, clinging to the last vestiges of her belief. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I saw it. I saw the dress. I saw myself. It was real. It was real. Dr. Peterson turned to the other two men, his voice low and grave, as if she wasn't even there, just a specimen under observation. You see? The core delusion is incredibly robust. She's built an entire world in her mind, piece by carefully constructed piece, filling the void left by the trauma. The real one, the one where she lost him, where her life was irrevocably altered, is simply unacceptable to her. Anything we say, any truth we offer, any attempt to introduce reality, only seems to heighten her anxiety and reinforces the delusion by being perceived as a threat, as a conspiracy against her. Even if I were to sit here and tell her the absolute truth about myself, about her history, about this facility, she would process it through the filter of the delusion and revert right back in her fantasy within minutes. So, you believe the best course of action is still? The younger consultant prompted. Continue with the current treatment protocol, DR. Peterson confirmed with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of long, frustrating experience. Increase the sedative slightly to mitigate the agitation she's currently experiencing. Perhaps introduce some mild antipsychotics if this pattern of episode recurrence persists, though previous trials have shown limited efficacy and significant side effects. He turned back towards Mrs. Gable, Nurse Gable. Nurse, the injection. Let's keep her calm. Nurse Gable nodded silently, efficiently, moving towards her with the syringe. April scrambled back in the bed, pressing herself against the headboard, panic rising like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. She didn't want the injection. It made her feel gone, empty, like her mind was being erased, like she was dying to this reality, being forced into another. But which was the real one? The beautiful house, the returning husband, the accident she survived? Or this sterile room, the doctors, the dead husband, the diagnosis of madness? Part 4. The Turning Point. The world tilted violently, spinning on an axis she couldn't comprehend. The sterile room, the impassive faces of the doctors and nurses, the menacing approach of the syringe. It all dissolved, shimmering and distorting, like a sandcastle hit by a sudden, unexpected wave. The chilling words echoed and re-echoed in the void left behind. Her husband died, created a fake reality, bipolar, schizophrenia, no mirror, 2 years. 2 years? She'd been here for 2 years? No, impossible. She'd been home, getting ready for Ethan, just now. With a sudden, sharp, ragged gasp that clawed at her throat, April woke up. She was drenched in sweat, the thin fabric of her clothes plastered uncomfortably to her skin. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird trying desperately to escape, a frantic, uneven rhythm. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, each one a painful effort. Meadowbrook, Dr. Peterson, Nurse Gable, the empty wall, the diagnosis, the dead husband. It had been a nightmare. A terrifying, vivid, profoundly unsettling nightmare. It felt so real, too real. She found herself slumped deep in the familiar armchair in her study, the worn leather cool beneath her skin. The book she had been reading, a collection of classic mystery stories Ethan had bought her, had fallen open beside her on the thick Persian rug. Sunlight, golden and warm, streamed through the tall windows overlooking the back garden, painting bright stripes across the room, chasing away the shadows of the nightmare. She blinked, disoriented, shaking her head to clear the lingering fog. She looked at the antique clock on the mantelpiece, the one that chimed on the quarter hour. 5 p.m. Oh no! The realization hit her with a jolt, sending another wave of adrenaline through her system. 5 o'clock. Pranay must be coming home. She'd fallen asleep, drifted off reading in the quiet afternoon, and had that awful, awful dream. How could she have wasted the afternoon? After all her plans, the dress, the lilies, the perfect dinner. Panic lending her speed, she scrambled out of the armchair, the nightmare fading like smoke in the bright sunlight. She smoothed down her clothes, the comfortable loungewear, not the black lace dress. The dress, that was from the dream. She pushed the thought away. Just a dream. She rushed out of the study, through the wide, familiar hallway towards the main entrance. The house was quiet, peaceful. No voices, no emotion. Just as she reached the foyer, the solid oak front door opened inward. And there he was. Ethan. Her face lit up, the last vestiges of the nightmare dissolving instantly into sheer relief, the overwhelming joy, the profound rightness of seeing him standing there in the doorway, silhouetted against the late afternoon light. He was real. He was here, safe. The accident, the waiting, the terrifying dream, it was all behind them now. They were together again. She ran to him, a breathless laugh escaping her lips, throwing her arms around his neck, holding him tightly, burying her face in his chest, inhaling his familiar, comforting scent, a mix of his cologne and the crisp outdoor air. He was wearing the dark gray suit she loved, the one with the faint pinstripe. He was solid, warm, undeniably real. He smiled, a genuine, warm, loving smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, the smile that always melted her heart. April, hey, missed you, sleepyhead. Did you have a good nap? He said, his voice low and affectionate, exactly the voice of the husband she knew. Sleepyhead, a good nap. He thought she'd just been napping. She pulled back slightly, still holding his hands, her eyes drinking him in, assuring herself he was real, whole. Ethan, oh, I missed you so much. She said, her voice thick with emotion. Welcome home. I had the strangest dream. He squeezed her hands. A bad one? Just confusing, she hedged, deciding not to burden him with the specifics of her anxiety-fueled nightmare. Never mind that now. You're here. She felt a wave of pure, unadulterated happiness wash over her. He was here, safe. The world was right again. I'll make you some tea, she said, stepping past him towards the kitchen, needing to do something to occupy her hands, to channel her bubbling energy. Then she paused, her gaze falling on the small watercolor painting hanging on the wall near the staircase. A peaceful landscape in soft greens and blues, a gift from Ethan last year for her birthday. It had always been her favorite. She straightened it almost unconsciously, a small, domestic gesture, an affirmation of their shared life in this house. She noticed the small, almost imperceptible etching in the corner of the frame that Ethan had added, their initials and a date. Her lucky number, their anniversary, September 9th. She smiled, a genuine, happy, untroubled smile this time. Everything was okay. The nightmare was just that. A bad dream born of stress, of the lingering fear from the accident, of the anxiety of waiting for him to come home. It wasn't real. This was real. Their home. Their life. Him. Part 5. The Aftermath and Lingering Shadows. April busied herself in the kitchen, the familiar, comforting routine of making tea for Ethan and Anchor after the disorientation of the nightmare. The whistling kettle, the clinking of the teacups, the comforting aroma of Earl Grey. These were the small, solid realities she could hold on to. Ethan came in a few minutes later, loosening his tie, dropping his briefcase by the counter with a soft thud. He seemed different, quiet, more tired than usual. Distant, even after her enthusiastic welcome. "Rough day, honey?" she asked, pouring the hot water into the teapot, trying to draw him out of whatever was preoccupying him. He nodded, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of weariness rather than nervous habit this time. "Long one, April. Met with some consultants today, over at Meadowbrook." April paused, her hand hovering over a teacup, a shiver tracing its way down her spine despite the warmth of the kitchen. Meadowbrook, the name from her dream. The psychiatric facility. A cold, unsettling echo. "Meadowbrook?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light, casual, as if the name held no significance for her. Isn't that a psychiatric place? Way out on the east side?" Ethan stopped rubbing his neck and looked at her, his expression unreadable, a flicker of surprise, then something else crossing his face. "Yes, it is," he said slowly. "A difficult case we've been consulting on. Years now, actually. A young woman." He didn't elaborate, just picked up a discarded newspaper from the counter, using it as a shield. April felt a sharp prickle of unease. Meadowbrook. A difficult case. A young woman. Was it just a coincidence? Or had the nightmare dredged up something real, something connected to Ethan's work that she wasn't fully aware of? But that was absurd. Ethan wasn't a psychiatrist. He was a financial analyst. He worked downtown in the city dealing with mergers and acquisitions. Meadowbrook was miles away, out in the quiet, wooded countryside. His work had nothing to do with psychiatric hospitals. Did it? She finished making the tea, her hands trembling slightly, arranged some biscuits on a plate, and carried the tray into the living room. Ethan was already settled on the sofa, flipping through the paper, his brow furrowed in concentration. He barely looked up when she set the tray down on the coffee table. "I really missed you, she said, sitting beside him, trying to bridge the strange distance that seemed to have appeared between them. She reached out to touch his arm, hoping for a touch back, a word of affection that would banish the lingering unease. He folded the paper slowly, deliberately, finally turning to her. He gave her a small, polite smile. It was the smile from the dream. The one that was kind but detached. "You too, April." Polite, not warm. Not the smile of a husband who had been away for a month and was genuinely happy to be home. It was the smile of someone being kind to a stranger. "The trip? How was Seattle?" she prompted, determined to reignite the connection, to pull him back into their shared reality, the one she had been so eager to return to. He paused, looking at her strangely, his head tilted slightly, that unreadable expression back on his face. "Seattle?" "I didn't go to Seattle. April," he said, his voice gentle, patient, the voice of someone correcting a confused person. "I told you, I was at the conference in Chicago. The Medical Ethics Conference. With Dr. Finch." Chicago? Dr. Finch? But he'd been gone for a month. He'd said Seattle when he left. They had talked about his hotel in Seattle. And Dr. Finch. Wasn't she the woman in her dream? The psychiatrist? The one with the phone? A cold knot of dread began to tighten in her stomach, a creeping paralysis. The feeling of unreality, the dizzying confusion from a nightmare, started to creep in at the edges of her mind, like a gray fog. No, she whispered, shaking her head, denying his words, denying the possibility that her memory was wrong. No, you said Seattle. We talked about it. The Pike Place Market, the Space Needle. Break time equals 0. 7S / Ethan's polite smile faded completely, replaced by that familiar expression from a dream, the one that was concerned, deeply sad, but utterly detached. Clinical, the expression of Dr. Ethan Peterson. April, he said softly, his voice the same tone Dr. Peterson had used in the dream. You sometimes, you confuse things. Especially since the accident. The accident. Always the accident. Was she confusing things? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Or was he? Was this some elaborate form of gaslighting? Was he trying to make her believe she was losing her mind for some reason she couldn't fathom? She looked around the living room frantically, searching for anchors, for proof of her reality. It was their living room. The furniture was right, the paintings on the walls were theirs, the view from the window was the garden she tended. The scent of lilies from her room, though fainter now, still hung in the air. This was real. This was her home. Then her gaze fell on the mantelpiece. The clock. It was there, ticking softly. The porcelain figurines had bought her on their anniversary. They were there too. But next to them, a small, framed photograph she didn't recognize. It wasn't a photo of them. She leaned closer, compelled by a morbid curiosity. It was Ethan, standing outside a quaint cottage, bathed in warm sunlight, beside a woman she didn't know, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, both of them smiling brightly at the camera. And etched, almost imperceptibly, in the corner of the simple wooden frame, small and subtle, September 9th. Her breath hitched in her throat, a sharp, painful intake of air. September 9th. Her birthday, her lucky number, the date of the accident. The date etched into the frame of the painting in the hallway. The date the doctor in her dream had said her husband had died. Ethan followed her gaze to the photograph on the mantelpiece. His expression softened slightly, a flicker of genuine sadness and tenderness in his eyes, a look she had never seen directed at her. "My late wife," he said quietly, his voice filled with a profound sense of loss that was chilling in its sincerity. "We miss her very much." Late wife. April stared at the photograph, at the smiling woman she had never met, then back at the man she believed was her husband. His eyes were kind, yes, but they held no recognition of her as his wife. Only something else. A deep-seated concern, a gentle pity, the professional gaze of a doctor observing a patient with a chronic, debilitating condition. The carefully constructed reality she had built, the one where he was her husband, where the car accident was a shared trauma they both survived, where the black lace dress and the lilies were for his welcome home, it didn't just crumble. It imploded, collapsing inward like a dying star. The sharp, terrifying shards of the nightmare reality, the sterile hospital room, the crushing diagnosis, the empty wall where the mirror should have been, the pronouncement of his death, they slammed into place, forming a horrifying, undeniable new picture. She was an April Hayes, his wife. She was April Hayes, the patient at Meadowbrook. Ethan wasn't her husband. He was Dr. Ethan Peterson, a psychiatrist. The accident. It hadn't just injured them both. It had taken him, the real him. And in the aftermath of that unbearable loss, her mind had splintered, creating this elaborate, beautiful, agonizingly real delusion. This intricate world built of memory and longing to fill the void, to cope with a grief too immense to bear. She stood there in the middle of the living room, the tea growing cold on the tray, the sweet scent of lilies suddenly, sickeningly, suffocatingly sweet, the photograph on the mantelpiece a stark, irrefutable piece of evidence. She looked at the man she thought was her husband, at the photograph of the woman who was his real wife, the wife who had died. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the absolute bone, that she was trapped. Trapped not in a house, but in a world her broken mind had built. A world where he was alive, where they were married, where the accident was just a bad memory. A world that would inevitably dissolve every time the harsh, undeniable light of truth threatened to penetrate. Every time a name was misspoken, a date mentioned, a photograph seen. And when it dissolved, she would find herself back in the sterile quiet of Meadowbrook, only for the delusion to rebuild itself, slightly different perhaps, slightly more fragile, but always centered around the ghost of the man she couldn't bear to lose, the man who was now her doctor. There was no going home. She was already there. This was home, and it was a prison of her own making. The mirror hadn't lied about the dress because in the reality her mind had conjured, she was wearing it. She had seen herself. She saw herself in that reality, the one where he was coming home to her, whole and alive. But in the true reality, the one she occasionally glimpsed through the widening cracks of her delusion, she was in a hospital gown, perhaps sitting in that sterile room, or perhaps just here in this house, which was also part of the elaborate stage set of her mind, staring at an empty wall, waiting for the next moment the illusion would break, waiting for Dr. Peterson or Nurse Gable to appear, waiting for the injection. The wound wasn't the accident itself. It wasn't the physical injuries or the fear. The wound was her mind, irrevocably broken, forever trapped in a cycle of grieving, forever weaving the same beautiful, tragic lie to protect itself from a truth it could not accept. And the shadows, they weren't just lingering at the edges of her vision. They were her new, permanent companions, the ever-present harbingers of the truth she was forever running from.